Hello everyone and welcome to Module 4. In Module 4 we'll talk about APA format I'll go over fairly briefly some of the common errors and mistakes that I see students making in APA format. And there's also another tutorial linked on Campus Cruiser that goes over some of the details of APA format. And there's a lot of other handouts and resources that I link to as well. So we use APA format primarily as standardized writing. It allows us to expect a certain style and voice and level of citation from other people's work, and so we can kind of skim over some of those pieces and focus on the content of the writing. It also gives us a certain standard that we expect all writing to adhere to. And so while a lot of people think of this as, sort of silly details, this is actually a really important piece of being able to communicate with one another in this discipline. It's also a way for us to give appropriate credit to others and avoid plagiarizing people. And so I'll go over some larger issues and then a lot of smaller things. One of the bigger issues that I think people struggle with is active versus passive voice. We write in active voice because it's easier to understand, it's often less wordy, and so there are a variety of reasons why that makes it a better way to write. So in an active sentence, the subject is actually doing the action. So here, a couple of examples here. An active voice version of this sentence would be the participants completed the survey. A passive voice version would be the participants were given a survey to complete. So in that first version, the participants, the subject of that sentence, is actually doing the action. They're completing a survey. A second example, an active voice sentence would be researchers demonstrated an association between sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction. A passive voice version is it was shown that there was an association between sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction. So again, it was shown is a passive way to say that. We don't know how it was shown, who showed it, and so the active version gives us a much clearer and more concise version. The OWL Purdue website has a nice overview of active versus passive voice. There's a link to it here. There's a link to the OWL Purdue website, the APA formatting section in general, under Campus Cruiser as well. So that's a great resource in addition to obviously the publication manual itself. Another place that students often get tripped up, or people often get tripped up, not just students, is how to express numbers. So whether to use words or numerals. We use numerals to express numbers that are 10 and above, though as with most rules, there are some exceptions. You can look at the APA format book and see some of those exceptions. We also use numerals to express percentages, ages, and scores on a scale, among other things. Those are the most common ones that you will likely encounter, particularly at this stage in your careers. And then we use words to express numbers beginning sentences, so we never begin sentences with a numeral. Often we actually try and reword the sentence to avoid starting the sentence with a number in general. And then we use words to express, obviously, numbers below 10. And so, as with all rules, there are some exceptions, and so make sure that you review that section in the APA publication manual. Plagiarism is a big piece of APA formatting, of academic writing, life in general. And plagiarism is presenting work either paraphrased or directly quoted without attributing that work to its source. And one of the things that I see students doing sometimes is writing a paper that is a lot of direct quotations. So it'll be one sentence of their own and 3 sentences directly quoting other people's work. And that's still not quite cutting it. So we only really want to use direct quotations when there is something that's said so perfectly, so well by the author or authors that we couldn't possibly paraphrase it, something very specific that we couldn't possibly paraphrase. But generally, you want to have a pretty good rationale for using a direct quote. It's also not enough just to change a few words in a sentence and cite the source. You really have to put the findings into your own words and credit that source. As a note, I think I mentioned this in the intro, if you're caught plagiarizing this course, you'll fail the assignment and likely the course. I take that very, very seriously. When you turn in the assignments, you'll get a report that is percent similar to other sources. You'll often get that report and it will say something like 20%, 30%, and that may make you freak out at first. Often that is a reflection of references and the fact that everybody references things in the exact same way. So your references might be identical to some other people's references. So I don't just look at the percentage, I look at actually what the content is. And so if you, when you get your report, make sure to glance over that and make sure that you haven't inadvertently plagiarized, because even accidentally plagiarizing is still plagiarizing. All right, so I'll go over a bunch of small issues, although they're large, but I'll run through several of them that I think are common issues, aside from passive voice and numerals and plagiarism. So wordiness is a big piece of writing in APA format and writing for academic audiences in general. And so you always want to make sure that you're being as concise as you possibly can. The publication manual has some guidelines and some tips to help you try and write more concisely. Affect versus effect. So these words sound the same, affect. And this is one that trips people up a lot. So to affect with an A means to influence something. This is typically a verb, though in psychology we often talk about affect in terms of more sort of an emotional or mood state for people. But let's stick with the typical verb usage. So for example, longitudinally, sexual satisfaction affected relationship satisfaction. Affect with an E indicates the result of something. It's typically a noun. So for example, results indicated a significant effect of sexual satisfaction on relationship satisfaction. So just be aware of that as you write. The APA publication manual goes over the use of semicolons versus colons. That's another one that often trips people up. Semicolons should be used to separate two independent clauses. You don't have to capitalize the first letter of that first word in the second clause when you use a semicolon. Colons should be used to separate a complete introductory clause, so that first part is a complete sentence, from a second clause that may or may not be able to stand on its own. But according to the APA publication manual, somehow illustrates, extends, or amplifies the preceding thought. And so if that second clause is a complete sentence on its own, the first letter of the first word should be capitalized. And so you always want to think when you're using semicolons and colons, whether or not that should be in the same sentence or whether or not it makes sense to have two separate sentences. Quotation marks is another piece that people often get tripped up on. So make sure that you look over the publication manual for when to use double versus single quotes and when to use a block quotation. One thing that students often mess up is that periods and commas should be inside of that closing quotation mark. So make sure that you're following those basic grammar rules for that. And a few others, the ampersand versus and. So for in-text citations, use the ampersand sign in parenthetical citations and use the word and in non-parenthetical citations. For the reference list, when you have author listings, you'll use the ampersand sign. And the APA publication manual goes over some of that. Two things that I think are really common things that I often correct in students' papers are making comparisons clear and appropriate use of reference when using pronouns. So your publication manual goes over some of the making the comparisons clear piece. So for example, if you wrote the sentence, men scored higher in sexual satisfaction, you always want to make sure that you're clear. So are you saying men scored higher than women in sexual satisfaction, or men scored higher in sexual satisfaction than in relationship satisfaction, or than in some other outcome that you're looking at? So you always want to make that clear when you're writing. A common one that I also get is when you start a sentence with the word this. So this exemplifies, whatever, or this is an excellent example of blah, blah, blah. And make sure that reference is clear or add the referent to the sentence itself. I always want to make sure that I know what the this is that you're talking about. Sometimes it can be perfectly clear from the sentence before that, but it's not always. So you want to read over that and make sure that you're clear about what that this is. So the publication manual is obviously your primary reference to look up APA formatting rules. As I mentioned, the OWL Purdue website is also a great resource. That's one that I would strongly recommend that you look to. And so the first quiz in this course will be a quiz on APA format. And so I want you to pay really close attention to details. The kinds of questions that I'll be asking are going to be a lot about what this lecture covered, what the tutorial covers, and some of the basics in the chapters that I've assigned for in the APA publication manual. And so, for example, a question might be, which of the following citations is correctly in APA format? And I don't have the hanging indentation here, and you won't see that in the quiz as well, honestly, because I couldn't figure out how to do that in the quiz. So typically you would have a hanging indent on the second 2 lines here. But you'll want to look at these citations, or I did some in-text citations, some reference list citations, some sentences that use different kinds of active versus passive voice. But for this example, you want to look at this and you're going to be looking at all the details of this. So if you want to pause for a second here and try and figure out which one of these is correct, then I will talk about it on the next slide. So you can pause now. So this one is the correct citation. And so the reason that this first one is incorrect is a couple of reasons. So first of all, this first word should be capitalized, but the rest of these words should not be capitalized according to APA format. So the title of the article itself, that first word should be capitalized. The first word after a colon should also be capitalized. And any proper nouns should be capitalized. So United States, New York City, etc. So the journal title here is correct, as is the volume number, but the issue number is also incorrect here. So this issue number should not be italicized. So otherwise this is actually correct. This one is correct in its use of capital letters here, but we don't see italicized journal title or volume number here, so that's incorrect for that reason. And this one down here is incorrect for a couple of reasons as well. So here you'll notice that there's not a space between each of the author first name abbreviations, and you always want to have a space in there. The case is correct in the title, but in the journal title, all the words should be capitalized. The first letter of all the primary words should be capitalized. So you won't capitalize of here, but you would capitalize journal, sex, and research. And then otherwise this is correct. We have an italicized volume number and a non-italicized issue number. So you're going to want to make sure you go through those and pay really close attention to those details, commas, italics, periods, quotation marks, things like that. So there are 12 questions on that quiz, and I gave you 90 minutes to do it, probably more than you will need, but there are a lot of details, so I want to make sure that you have the time to go through it and look at those details. As always, if you have questions or thoughts, post them under the general discussion forum, drop me an email, etc. Thanks.